I should say that I practiced law for about 40 years. And the Juan Rivera case was one of the most notorious prosecutions in Illinois' modern history.
In terms of why Juan was sort of chosen as a suspect in this case, at that time, Juan was, a street punk, essentially. Like, he was 19, he was a college or a high school dropout, he had a history of mental illness. He, by his own admission, spent his days kind of getting high and hanging out with gang members.
Juan Rivera at the time had a history of low functioning, low IQ. He had a history of mental illness back from Puerto Rico and New York and ultimately in the Chicago area. And he was essentially a ne'er-do-well. He was a petty burglar in the Waukegan area.
They originally brought Juan in because he was in the Lake County Jail because of his burglary charge. He'd stolen some car speakers, and he had told an inmate who he was in with, Edward Martin, that he knew something about the crime.
Juan starts talking to people, and he claims that he has been at this party where he saw a suspicious person with a scratch on their face talking about this murder, because literally everyone is talking about the Holly Staker murder. It had been unsolved at that point for over a month. One of the guys he's talking to eventually talks to the police.
It was basically jailhouse snitch testimony that got them interested in him and got them to bring him in for questioning. And one of the other reasons that he became a more ripe target for them was that he had a low IQ. He did not read very well. Although he was streetwise, he wasn't particularly sophisticated.
And so they're looking for anything at that point in time, and they hear about this guy, Juan Rivera, and they go and get him.
And when he got on their radar, Juan was a bit of an easy mark. Somebody who could be taken advantage of and could be misled and deceived.
I frankly think that they had a case where it was obviously a horrible crime. It wasn't just a rape and murder, it was an awfully violent, terrible rape and murder of a little girl. The public demands answers, and you can't just say, well, we're looking into it. They need to find somebody.
So let me tell you about the politics of Lake County in 1992. Lake County had been Republican going back decades and decades and decades. I mean, almost 100 years or more. And the state attorney at that time, Mike Waller, was married to a woman who had been a Lake County judge. The sheriff at that time was a former Lake County prosecutor. So not only was it very Republican, but the law enforcement apparatus was populated with a lot of former Lake County prosecutors.
And then in October of 1992, things began to escalate as they didn't find a better candidate.
The interrogation of Juan began at 9 a.m. on, let's call it day one, in early October. And it kept going, according to the police accounts, kept going basically day and night until 3 a.m. on day 3.
The commander of the Lake County Major Crimes Task Force was a guy named Gary Del Rey. His assistant was Chuck Fagan, who plays a major role in Juan's confession, as one of the interrogators in Juan's confession. And then there was a Waukegan detective named Lou Tessman, who also plays a very critical role in Juan's case. He was known as, the sort of closer in these homicide cases.
While conducting an interview, it's my practice to watch a person. I remember my mom saying to me many years ago, look at me when I'm talking to you. Well, because she knew when I was full of crap. And as a result of that, sir, I can look at someone and ask questions and see if in fact they look like they're hiding something, they're embellishing, fabricating, lying.
There were things in Lou Tessman's background that suggested he wasn't entirely truthful at times. And there'd been cases that he was involved with that sort of drew his credibility into question. One was he and a bunch of other officers had raided a woman's house, and it was the wrong house. There was another case involving a woman named Colleen Blue, who he had obtained a murder confession from for killing her child. And he told newspaper reporters at that time that She had 6 children. She couldn't handle another child, so she left this child in a bag by the side of the road. And so, this woman was accused of murder. But it turns out that the baby, DNA test of the baby proved that the baby wasn't hers.
How did you come to be assigned to the Staker homicide investigation?
I was one of the original members of the task force, and the Waukegan Police Department requested the assistance of the task force, which is protocol. And at that point, all the officers assigned to the task force would be contacted, and we would go, we would be told on the phone or the radio, whatever, where to go.
Juan Rivera was interrogated continuously by 10 or more different police officers.
The members of the task force were relieving each other.
If they got tired, the officers could leave the room and other officers would come in to continue that interrogation.
As a team of 2 or whatever got tired, someone would relieve them and take over.
They're yelling and screaming at him. He hasn't slept, he hasn't eaten. He's a kid, he's denying he has anything to do with this, and it's unrelenting. They just keep going and keep going and keep going. And on the 3rd night of this interrogation, Juan Rivera has a psychotic break.
By the time Juan signed his first false confession, Juan had been diagnosed by local nurses at the Lake County Jail as being in a psychotic state. He had been prescribed antipsychotic medications, very powerful ones. This was confirmed by 2 nurses who worked for Lake County.
He's seen catatonic, right? Staring at the wall, lying on the floor.
What's your last memory?
I know one of the detectives accusing me and asking me questions of the murder.
And when do you recall sort of coming to, or what's your memory of?
Waking up in a padded cell rubber room and being charged for this murder.
He was, hogtied and put in the rubber room, and that they, at some point, found him banging his head on what little, probably the corner of the window, like the windowsill, and had torn out a clump of hair. And we looked for the booking photo that they took after that event, and it doesn't exist, because we thought that could tell the story.
Where's the photograph of Juan?
Objection form, assumes facts not in evidence, foundation.
What photograph are you referring to, sir?
The photograph that was taken of Juan Rivera the morning of October 30th, depicting his injury on his forehead.
I don't know.
Were you present for that photograph?
No, I don't think so. No.
You're the lead investigator, right?
Yes.
You would expect that one of your experienced investigators would take a photograph of a suspect depicting a wound and properly inventory that photograph, right?
Yes, that's right. I would expect that. Mm-hmm.
That didn't happen.
I don't know, did it?
We do not know precisely what happened during the interrogation because it was not electronically recorded. So we know that something really bad happened during the interrogation, but we don't know chapter and verse because it wasn't recorded.
We asked him, if he would allow us to videotape, his interview with us. He said he didn't want to do that. Then he was asked if we could audio tape his interview with us. He didn't want to do that. Then we asked him if he would write this out in his own handwriting. He didn't want to do that.
This I remember vividly because, again, I heard it so many times in trial. They asked him, well, did you have recordings? Yes. Do you have videotapes? Yes. Why didn't you use it? Because Mr. Rivera said he doesn't want it. Are you kidding me? When the hell has that ever happened in any interrogation in this universe? Or the client said no, so we didn't put it up. Get the hell up out of here. Y'all be trying to turn it off because y'all getting in trouble.
To suggest that Juan Rivera, had the wherewithal at some point to say, I don't want this videotaped, it's implausible, as are most of the things in that confession, to be honest.
This is the confession that then they take to prosecutors, and the prosecutors say, no way, you got to go back and get something better.
You get the suspect to make an admission, but then that's not good enough. What you have to do as a police officer is to get more information. Just saying I did it isn't good enough. Now I have to mold this into what they refer to as a post-admission narrative.
They get this confession from Juan that's full of problems, right? It's inaccurate. You know, the baby's in diapers, she wasn't in diapers. Holly's wearing something, it was wrong. The way it was described was wrong. They get him to confess, but it doesn't make sense, it doesn't add up. So they have a meeting with Mike Waller that morning at 9 o'clock, right? And they decide, now what do we do? And the answer is, let's bring in the closer. Let's bring in Lou Tessman, who goes in and finds Juan after he's been, psychotic, hogtied, perfectly relaxed and amiable, who just happens to provide all the right answers and clean up everything for the final confession.
Lou Tessman brags that he's been able to get a confession in 96% of murder cases that he's investigated. And the way that he does that is by just making up the confession himself. And that's what happened in Juan's case. He wrote every single sentence of that confession. He took it to Juan and he said, Juan, sign this. So why did Juan sign this false confession? Right? A lot of folks ask, if you didn't have anything to do with the crime, why don't you just stick to your guns and say, I didn't have anything to do with it? Well, Juan had done that for 4 days without a break. This is an interrogation by Lake County Major Crimes Task Force officers that takes place over 4 days and culminates in 26 hours of constant interrogation. Would you consider it to be too excessive of an interrogation if the interrogation lasted for 26 hours nearly uninterrupted?
Uninterrupted?
Incomplete hypothetical.
Join.
Again, let me make sure I understand the question. Are you saying uninterrupted, 26 hours is too long?
My question is, would you consider that to be too excessive?
Continuous 26 hours?
Yes.
Again, just to make sure I'm understanding your question, sir. So in other words, if I was talking to someone here, are you asking me that this conversation, if it took place for 26 hours, is too long?
Yes.
Yes.
What if you took bathroom breaks? Would it still be too excessive?
Objection, incomplete hypothetical.
No. Then at some point, if there were bathroom breaks, cigarette breaks, coffee breaks, food, then I wouldn't consider it that bad, sir.
Most of us will look at a situation like this and say, well, I would never confess to something I didn't do. In a situation, you could question me for weeks and I would never confess to something I didn't do. But the social science is pretty clear that when you put somebody under duress and you give them an out, you give them an explanation that seems to exonerate them, and they feel like this is their way to leave this interrogation, leave this questioning and go home, that they will tell you what you want to hear. And what baffles me about this is that it is so well known, and it's so well known in law enforcement and in social science.
False confessions can happen under intense systematic questioning, particularly when the person being questioned is vulnerable. And I think had it been brought to light how suggestible people can be, even in these circumstances, even in admitting to a horrific murder, I think if that could have been brought to light, something that's better known now. I mean, Juan Rivera isn't the only person to have given police a false confession. When you've been under pressure, hour after hour, when people are becoming accusatory, it is possible for vulnerable people just to stop the interrogation to confess to something they didn't do.
And it doesn't really take a lot for the police to get a false confession. They can wear people down. They're allowed to lie to them about the strength of the evidence. We have literally hundreds of false confessions reported nationally.
A person confessing for something they didn't do? Listen, how many veterans that are trained for war and they crack? These are people that are trained to kill. So you mean to tell me that a common person that has never experienced an ordeal like this is not gonna crack? Come on, man. That doesn't make no sense. But that's how society is looking at things nowadays. You know, they don't believe that an officer is gonna just do things maliciously to get a conviction.
If Juan had been able to say something with specificity about the injuries that she sustained, or where certain evidence could be found that the police could not possibly have known, then that would have been the holy grail. And that did not happen because it was made up.
One thing that really struck me about how this thing unfolded, you know, he was charged on October 30th. The following Tuesday, that was a Friday, the following Tuesday was Mike Waller's re-election. You know, like that part of it is just, when you know everything else that's going on, is really troubling.
I will tell you, at the time of this case, what passed for a criminal justice system in Lake County, Illinois was in fact a criminal enterprise.